All right, welcome everybody. I think we can probably go ahead and get started. And as I read the kind of introductory materials, folks will filter in. So I'll start by reading the notice of non-discrimination, which reads that you are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. The next slide is on the virtual meeting guidelines, stating that all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. You can please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants may mute and unmute themselves, but always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by either clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar, and the chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box by email at emaguire@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3681. The accessibility statement reads that this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. And again, if you require any additional accommodations, you can contact Erin McGuire at emaguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. We'll now move to our first agenda item, which is introductions. So I will go ahead and read down our roll call here. My name is Derek Cravat. I am representing MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning here as the chair. Next on our list is MAPC, Eric Barassa. Or sorry, it's not
Julie
Eric.
Waller's here.
Sorry
with
about
MAPC.
that, Julia. Yep.
Yeah, Julie Waller's for
yep.
for MAPC.
Thank you. Force of habit here, and I got to update our spreadsheet.
No worries.
Okay. Next is Boston Transportation Department, Jen Rowe.
I'm stepping in for Jim Fitzgerald today.
Thanks, Jen. Framingham, Metro West Region, Dennis.
Dennis Giametti.
Great. Rentham, Rachel Benson. Okay, move on to City of Newton, David Kozis.
David Kozis, representing Mayor Fuller in Newton.
Great. Norwood, Tom O'Rourke.
Hey, Tom O'Rourke, representing from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Great. And Intercore Region, Somerville, Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, representing Mayor Ballantyne and the Intercore.
Great. RTAC, Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, I'm in a little noisy environment, so I'll be off camera. I'm sorry, muted for most of the time. Thank you.
Great.
Advisory Council.
No problem. Thanks, Leonard. And MBTA Advisory Board, Amira or Brian. Okay, no, see anyone there. So I think that calls the roll. Did I miss anyone? Any members? Okay, so welcome everyone. We'll move on to the next item, which is public comments. Is there anyone present that would like to make a public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is a summary of the January 11th, 2024 meeting. I'll ask for a motion and second to approve the January 11th meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All right, seeing none. I'll read the roll. Mass.otp is yes. Julia Wallers,
Sorry, finding me button. Julia Wallers, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Ben Rowe, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
David Gozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Tom O'Rourke,
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
and Leonard Dickens.
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Move on to the next item, which is an update to transportation policy analysis work. I will turn it over to Abby Katrumbas. So take it away, Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby. I am the new-ish, it's been about 4 months now, transportation policy analyst for the MPO. And I'm here just to kind of talk about like what my role in as on the MPO staff actually is, sort of some of the things that we've been working on, and then really what I would like to mostly have is sort of discussion in terms of like research topics and policy topics that board members may be interested in. If we could go to the next slide. Oh, and the next one. Yeah, so in terms of scope of work, what I was actually hired to do is keeping the MPO apprised of regional, state, and federal transportation policy developments, analyzing how our current and proposed policies could align with the MPO's goals for the region. An example of this is that I will be assisting with the Vision Zero action plan that we received the Safe Streets for All grant money for, and sort of helping to work on the policy section with like best practices nationwide. Also doing independent research projects that support MPO goals, which is what I would like to have a discussion on soon, and facilitating policy dialogues with board members, utilizing that feedback to sort of move forward research discussions and future research agendas. Next slide. So sort of an example of this, what the next several slides will be about is a follow-up to the roadway pricing memo that Seth Asante and Ryan Hicks presented, I believe in mid-January. So that's an example of internal work that happened tied to an external development, which is the creation of the Transportation Finance Task Force that the Healy administration has recently, I believe it's been finally named and appointed now, but that was introduced by an executive order in January. And so the following steps, sort of linking those two developments together, is looking into the source material from Seth and Ryan to answer questions that the board had regarding roadway pricing and using that to facilitate conversations on how future like finance policies can move us farther, closer to our transportation goals. Of course, we always want to be moving closer. Next slide. So to answer some of the questions that the board members had from the initial presentation of the roadway pricing memo, first, just for like a refresher, it was 5 case studies. San Francisco and Minnesota were high occupancy travel lanes, so like tolled lanes to help reduce congestion. Chicago was transportation network provider fees, so like Uber and Lyft fees in certain areas of the city. Washington, D.C. did variable parking pricing for particularly congested areas to make street parking more expensive, and they used technology to make that like dynamically priced. And New York City is the congestion pricing in Manhattan Central Business District that is just being rolled out. So one of the biggest concerns that board members had was how pricing strategies can impact low-income drivers and like what efforts were used to sort of minimize that. So for a few of them, it was less directly applicable. For example, high occupancy travel lanes, variable parking, and the TNP fees didn't have like direct pricing mitigation measures because those aren't like compulsory payments. Like you don't have to take an Uber or Lyft into this area if you don't want to, but of course, like that still has its pros and cons. But what can be used from those is that some of the revenue from those fees has been used to fund transit improvements. For example, in Chicago, the TNC fee brings in about $200 million a year, and 16 million of that was bookmarked for the CTA for like capital improvements. A example of a direct mitigation strategy for low-income drivers was in New York City. There's a tax credit for low-income residents of the Corden pricing area. I believe that's residents of the central business district with an adjusted gross income of under 60K, and low-income commuters from outside of the district get a reduced rate after the 10th charge. So people who have to commute into Manhattan by car and are low income also get a reduced rate. So those are some of the most prominent examples of pricing strategies used to minimize the burden on low-income drivers. Next slide. In terms of the impact on cut-through traffic, it really hasn't been studied in like a quantitative way for most of this. Minnesota had looked into it. As they put, sometimes they were surprised by the way that ending the lanes could create like overflow traffic onto like side streets off of the highways. And so to mitigate that, they've said that they just kind of like went back to the drawing board and would move where the lanes ended. Variable parking pricing and TNC fees didn't actually affect through trips. So if you are taking like a trip from outside of the Corden to another area outside of the Corden, you didn't get the charge. It's only applicable to beginning and ending destinations in that region. And so variably pricing parking is the same way. So in that way, it also doesn't really have an impact on cut-through traffic because it's not meant to affect that. And New York City's congestion pricing will have to be evaluated. Next slide. So something else that the board members wanted to learn more about was how freight and commerce could be affected. In Washington, the variable pricing parking has actually made parking easier for commercial vehicles by virtue of having fewer people parking there in general. So it's led to a pretty drastic decline in illegal/double parking in the designated area, which has opened up more space for delivery drivers. And this helps reduce fines incurred by the delivery vehicles, which in some cases could exceed $1,000 per vehicle per month. So it's a really intense operating expense that a lot of like commercial companies just sort of have to factor in, is how many fines their commercial vehicles will accumulate over time. So having actual legal parking is a really big deal. And the length of individual double parking sessions in the Corden with the variable price parking declined from 131 minutes per session per vehicle to 74. So almost half, like decreased by almost half in just the first 7 months of the pilot. And in New York City, the volume of deliveries is expected to remain the same, even with congestion pricing. Delivery trucks may also be able to find parking more easily, similar to Washington, D.C., but again, we'll have to see if that's borne out. But because delivery trucks in the Manhattan Central Business District make more than one delivery at a time, the congestion pricing will be spread out amongst those multiple deliveries. On average, delivery trucks made 5.5 deliveries per trip, so 5 to 6 businesses. Like the fee will be spread out amongst those. So they don't see it being a very big lift. Next slide. And lastly, something that board members wanted to know is what level of pricing actually influences behavioral change. And the answer is likely higher than the existing programs, at least the ones that we've looked at. The University of Minnesota has not been able, so for Minnesota's high occupancy travel lanes, has not been able to find evidence of behavior change, even at the highest toll rate of $8 a vehicle. Washington, D.C., as we know, has seen behavior change in double parking rates, with street parking capped at $5.50 an hour. And the New York City program will have to be evaluated. In terms of the opportunity cost of congestion in Boston specifically, which is something else board members wanted to know, it's roughly 134 hours per driver per year and almost $2,300 per driver per year. Next slide, or is that the last one on this? Okay, yes. So actually go back one. So just to kind of like pause here for any follow-up questions, I do only want to spend like a few minutes on this because I want to talk more about the research topics in the next slide, but I do want to pause here if there's like follow-up comments or questions or anything like that.
Great. Thanks, Abby. David.
Thank you, Abby. I'm trying to understand. So I understand that, that these research projects, the staff research projects are usually part of, the UPWP. Sometimes we include specific staff research projects and funding. But Abby, are you talking about something different, some other sort of set aside that's already approved? I guess that's my question. Thanks.
Yeah, so my understanding is that like although we do a decent amount of like, or not decent amount, the UPWP is for like much more discrete sort of like one-off sort of studies. What we are hoping for with my role is to sort of build out like a policy program that may or may not ever become like an actual program in the way that we use programs. But something more akin to that than just being like, do this research like as an iterative process throughout the annual UPWP.
Okay, so it seems like that there were several studies that that you just went through, or maybe it was one big study, and just thinking about which are the most important or most interesting things for you to take a deeper dive into.
Yeah, and to sort
Yeah.
of yeah, like have more of like a continuing conversation as opposed to just like creating a report and then moving on.
Mhm.
Having a much more like iterative type of process.
Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
Tegan, did you want to weigh in on that?
I guess, I don't know, I guess, David, if you said you understood it, maybe I don't need to say anything else, but maybe just to elaborate a little bit, we realized that the policy analyst skill set was a skill set that we needed throughout quite a bit of our work, not just a discrete, study aspect, but also so much of what we do is related to policy work. And so Abby's role, like many folks' role at the MPO, has the ability both to support something that her skill set in policy analysis is the kind of the core support to a discrete effort. And also, I think as you just kind of said, weave it throughout a lot of the work that we do. So the same thing happens with engagement type skill sets, right? There are specific engagement type activities, but there's also a way in which that work is woven throughout all the work as an agency that we do. But Abby has a skill set that is new to us as an MPO and extremely valuable. And so what we also really want to do is we've heard from you all over the past years, different interests in different aspects of how policy in our state and in our region might be evolving and how the MPO might engage in that. And so we'd like to hear from you more how you as an MPO want to engage this skill set and explore these ideas. Abby has a lot of her own really great ideas and staff do in general. But we want to engage you all in that conversation so that we can work with you and your interest as board members.
Yeah, and I think that's a good kind of launching point to the next and last slide of this, which is just sort of opening up for discussion, like potential research areas or avenues that we could or would want to go down. So some of the things that we've already talked about.
Sorry, I had a
like-
quick question about the previous
Yeah,
slide.
sorry.
Go ahead,
That's
Julia.
okay.
Yep.
Could you just go back to the previous slide? Yeah, just the bottom about what is the opportunity cost of congestion, that figure, is that money lost, $2,270 per driver? That's an analysis of like dollars lost by waiting in congestion? Or like how was that produced?
Yeah.
Or is
so
that an opportunity that we could leverage that much money per driver if we were to institute some form of pricing?
Yeah, so it's based off of all of the hours that people like miss work because they're late to a shift, or like their hourly wage multiplied by the number of hours that they have to sit in a car.
Right.
Yeah, the
Okay,
businesses
got
that
it. I
are being
just was making
patronized.
sure I understood that, because we're also looking at how much, for a revenue generating opportunity to, fund the T and transportation finance. That's a different conversation.
Thanks, Julia.
Yeah,
Jen?
I was just curious what the denominator was in that calculation, like how many drivers? So we could get a ballpark of what the total figure was.
that is a good question. So it was from INRIX, which is the firm that always ranks us as like having the worst parking. I mean, not the worst parking, having some of the worst congestion like worldwide every year. So I can look at that and get back to you. I don't actually know off the top of my head.
Thanks, Abby.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Fun.
in terms of
ahead.
like policy areas to discuss, so transportation finance is obviously really having a very necessary moment. But where I think sort of the MPO's work is a little bit unique in the way that like the Transportation Finance Task Force may not necessarily have like the expertise or the time or the staff devoted to it to investigate is municipal finance, because as many people on this call know, the state does not provide like adequate resources for municipalities to handle a lot of like maintenance and operating costs, let alone like capital improvements. And so that's where the Chapter 90 program comes in, and that's something that I personally am very passionate about, is sort of investigating like how that program, where its strong suits are in our region, where some of the lack may be, sort of where our cities and towns could use more support. And if they had that support, like what would they want to use it for? So that's something that I'm really interested in. And then like transportation revenue options writ large. So the roadway pricing memo, of course, that just came out, looked at a lot of things. The Transportation Finance Task Force will be looking at a lot of things. And some of those will involve like vehicle miles traveled tax. Some of those might involve higher excise taxes. Some of those might involve some sort of electricity taxing scheme, but like it seems really hard. So looking at some of those things. But what I really want to do is sort of take like the last few minutes of this to hear from you guys, from the committee members, on like areas of interest and or like, yeah, areas of interest.
Thanks, Abby. Any any thoughts or insights from folks? With respect to Chapter 90, is that something that you'd be looking at, kind of like just like inventorying current levels, looking at the formula, maybe sort of thinking about innovative or best practices for using that efficiently? That's one question I had, is just more details on the Chapter 90 piece.
Yeah. So that hasn't been like created into like a discrete like plan of study really. It's just sort of like an idea that I've been talking about with like basically anybody that will listen. But essentially I think what we don't have that like the legislature specifically has asked for is like an accounting of where the Chapter 90 money goes. We of course like have an accounting of it in terms of like municipal budgets, but we don't actually have like a good overarching idea of like how much money gets like left in the coffers is oftentimes used to justify like not increasing the Chapter 90 amount. But the reason that that money is left in the coffers has like a lot to do with the fact that it's not enough money for a lot of capital things, stuff like that. So I think more so getting like a more well-rounded picture of where the money goes, why it's going where it's going, and how much better we could be doing with it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. Or to save for year over year, right? It's like, I've heard, stories of folks taking like 5 years worth of Chapter 90 to pay for a single project, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, that's helpful. Julia?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said, Abby, about like following the money and just where does it go? Why does it go where it's going in this age, this particular, year where we have the new task force, like literally tasked at looking at revenue ways to pay for transportation in Massachusetts broadly. One thing that we've discussed internally at MAPC that might be, something that could be also one of the research topics here is, looking at other revenue options on the table, like parking, like garages, structures. I know this, I'm not sure where the line is drawn between what the task force does and like conducts themselves and what partners or like agencies supplement, but I just wanted to flag that as sort of an area that I think we probably know the least about. Like, what is the opportunity there? Is that money on the table and taxing that, extending sales tax, that type of thing? But yeah, the second bullet there, just really emphasizing that as a key priority for this year.
Thanks, Julia. Len?
Again, sorry for the background sounds. I mean, Abby, I'm going to be brief about this because I want to spare everyone else what they've heard from me many times. So I'll be happy to talk with you, at some other time. But I want us to explore going beyond simply VMT, but also pricing how we access the transportation network. And as people have heard me say, I want us to think of the whole transportation network as a transit network, a transit and freight network. And how you pay for it depends on how you access it. And how you access it depends on, well, along those lines, it's like how you use it. Is a function of how much burden you put on it. And so we try to assess your cost when you utilize the network and then price it accordingly. And I think with that, we can also build in equity. But I can go on for a lot about that, and hopefully we can talk some time about it. Thank you.
Son, David?
Yeah, thank you. Something that came up very recently in terms of financing transportation, I think could be a good topic. Some like a best practice in terms of shuttles that maybe start out very strongly with MPO funds. Just like the best ways to keep them going after the MPO funds are expired. Instead of we've seen this several times, just the service degrades. So I don't know if that would be like a Abby study or a UPWP study or either, but that's one idea. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, David. I know I've heard that from our rail and transit division as well as a need for microtransit kind of statewide. So that's an interesting idea. Jen?
Love this new category of Abby study. I just to throw in my own 2 cents on possible directions. I love the kind of exploration of roadway pricing and the continued exploration of it. I think particularly focusing in on what we can do as municipalities, which to me seem mostly like parking related and TDM related. And I know like Boston, we've been pushing forward our TDM program, and having opportunities to kind of evaluate how that's working, not just in Boston, but more broadly. And then also like at a regional level, which like for me is like tolls and or congestion pricing, those sort of mechanisms. And then 2 other topics. One I don't know I don't know much about at all, but I keep hearing about GANs repayments and how that influences our funding availability we have in the regional target program. So I'd be curious to understand more about that and like what other places use for financing large infrastructure like bridges. And then the final one is with the event of like micromobility and e-bikes, and I did see a little bit in this in the UPWP study submissions, kind of how to tackle some of the issues emerging therein related to batteries and also kind of sharing space on the roadway with different speeds of vehicles. Something to get ahead of.
Great. Thanks, Jen. All right. I don't see any more hands, so does that feel okay, Abby? Anything else on this? You good?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's what I came here to do. And thank you all for your feedback, ideas, and I'm sure we will talk more.
Great. Thanks, Abby. And yeah, all relevant
Thanks
to
for
keep
your
in
work
mind.
on this.
Yeah, thank you. All relevant to keep in mind as we talk about the broader universe, which is of course next on the agenda. Srilekha will be giving an overview of the study ideas that have been received so far as part of the fiscal year 2025 proposed studies through the survey and other means. We might not have time to get through all of the studies today, but I think we'll be, of course, meeting over the next couple months to go through the full list and other ideas that folks have. So I'll turn it over to Srilekha to kick us off on the universe of proposed studies.
Thanks, Derek, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this meeting. I am really excited to begin our discussion on the FFY 2025 Universe of Proposed Studies. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, I think in previous meetings, the universe does look a little bit different this year. We received over 100 study ideas through our surveys and our fall outreach, which is more than we have ever received, at least as long as I can remember. And we really do appreciate all of the submissions we received, and we thank respondents for the time and effort they spend to develop their proposals. So staff met about 2 weeks ago at this point to categorize studies by general topic area: climate resilience, bicycle pedestrian, freight, and transit/multimodal. We used the criteria seen on the screen: consistency with the goals of the LRTP, agency priorities, and current focus themes, whether it was supportive of ongoing program work, staff capacity, and regional relevance, to guide our discussion on whether a given study would be firstly within the scope of the MPO's work, and then whether it could be incorporated into an ongoing work programs task or as a discrete study. We had a particular focus on discussing discrete studies which could have future implications for that ongoing program work. Next slide, please. So based on our discussion and our initial evaluations, we came up with 23 studies that could either be incorporated into ongoing program work or done as a discrete study. The distinction between the two is noted by a pink highlight on the proposals that can be incorporated into program work if you're looking at the universe, the PDF of which is posted on the meeting calendar for today for your reference. Next slide, please. So pulling back a bit, the MPO's goal here is to fully fund its ongoing programs to support continuous work and to ensure that staff are able to respond to ongoing needs and emerging trends, such as those that we often hear through our discrete study outreach. The amount available for discrete studies in federal fiscal year 2025 is not yet known, but it is projected to be limited and similar to that of federal fiscal year 2024. Just to refresh your memory, this year we had about $150,000 for discrete studies. Next slide, please. Oh, and thank you for dropping the links in the chat. So with that, and this was a bit of a short context setting, I will ask you all to begin discussing these study ideas in front of you today. We have a number of staff available to answer questions or provide clarification. And I'm really looking forward today to hearing your priorities. And looking ahead, we, of course, will probably have a few more meetings based on today's progress. Even with 23 studies, we always have really good, robust conversations. So I would expect at least one more meeting to go through this. And once we all feel that questions are answered and you have enough information on each study to make a determination, we will circulate a survey to develop a committee recommended list. And taking a cue from last year, we will come up with a couple funding scenarios for discrete studies for the next fiscal year. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair, and yeah, looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Thanks, Srilekha. So just a quick clarifying. So you said the ones that are highlighted in the light purple, those ones are being referred to ongoing study programs, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Oh, sorry,
Okay.
light purple.
Okay, great. Okay. Great. Yeah. Well, with that, we can get into a discussion. Srilekha, were you thinking we'd kind of go line by line and spend a few minutes maybe on each study idea?
Yeah. I think we've done that in the past. I believe I will just ask the staff person for whom this is the most relevant to kind of give a bit of context for each study. So the first section is active transportation. Is Casey on, or anyone from the multimodal team?
I am here, yes.
Great. Go ahead, Casey.
All right.
Did you? Oh, yeah.
Let's
Go ahead.
see.
Yep.
Yep, sorry, accidentally
No.
muted again. So the first study that's on your screen right now is a study to kind of improve our network information. So this will help us have a better sidewalk network. This is a tool that's out there that we would like to try and use. But the process of actually using this tool will be pretty involved. So this is its own separate work effort. And if we're able to fund this in one federal fiscal year, hopefully we can get it all done. That's the ideal. If not, this might take a very long time to accomplish.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Any thoughts on this one? Okay. I did run this through our GIS services section in the Office of Transportation Planning at MassDOT, and there was interest from them in this. I think it's work that they are starting to look at. I think the road inventory file is mentioned in the description, but they don't have the level of detail that's kind of proposed through this type of effort. So I think it's definitely a need for data. But like you said, if it exceeds the amount available, it's something we could look at potentially at the statewide level as well, but can flesh it out a bit more. Jen?
I just wanted to note that this almost seemed like a first step also in like the second one, which we'll get to after, but like kind of getting a good assessment of where there are sidewalks before kind of getting to their condition.
Yeah, good point. Leonard, did you? Yeah, go ahead.
So
Yep.
how would the study be done? I mean, you understand the goal of it, I mean, but just give me an example, like what would we do? I mean, would we like go out and look at the sidewalks in a given area that we chose to specify?
I might not be the best person to speak to this, but my understanding is that we would work with the developers of Tile2Net. And so essentially we would pick at first we would start with a smaller area like a municipality, especially working with something that's a little bit more rural or further out. I think that's going to be there's going to be a learning curve to that process for like the technology. And so working closely with the company of like the Tile2Net folks and trying to kind of do some quality control type work on the front end. And so then hopefully once we've really like worked through that and gone through the weeds, in a first example, maybe a few examples, I think my understanding is that the process should become more streamlined afterwards once the technology kind of learns through the process.
And I can jump in. I think basically Tile2Net will use aerial imagery that we already have. So we won't have to go on the ground. We'll essentially be looking at these aerial images and doing some processing to get the sidewalk network from there. That being said, there could be some merit in going out on the ground and making sure that, that the program matches what we're seeing. But for the most part, it would just be using the aerial imagery that already exists.
Okay, fine. I mean, I know my question, but it came out a little harsh. I mean, but the genius is in the details, Vita. So I was kind of wondering what that processing is, Vita. And so I kind of use like going out and verifying. It's just an example of my off-the-cuff thinking, Vita. So I'm just, I just don't know. I mean, it seems interesting, and certainly it's the kind of like basic research that I think is good. I just don't really know what the processing involves. So this is just like, okay, but you answered as much as you could, and certainly I'm not saying up or down at this point, but I'm glad it's there. Thank you.
Great. So I know the next topic is, like Jen kind of referenced, is somewhat related. So might be helpful to go through that one as well and think about these together. Is this you as well, Casey?
Yeah, so I can just briefly say something. I think it'll be helpful to hear what everyone's opinions are. But this is a really interesting proposal. I think that having the data from the first proposal would really facilitate the ease with which we can accomplish this work. So at this point in time, we don't really have an existing data set that would make this a particularly feasible study within the amount of time and probably the amount of budget that we would have to spend on it, but it would be really interesting to do.
Great, thanks, Casey. So yeah, I mean, I think generally this is clearly a need, right? It just depends on the size and scope, and I see the staff comment there too, potential practical and timeline limitations, right? So I feel like maybe this warrants like an offline discussion and maybe input from our staff and Office of Transportation Planning on potential capacity there, or through our SPR, which is like our state level UPWP essentially, to look at this and sort of opportunities to collaborate there. So we can certainly do that. But I see some hands. So Steve Olenoff, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at particularly the first one on showing where sidewalks are on all the streets. Hasn't MAPC done that? I was at an open house there a number of years ago, and they were showing me how you could look at any street and it showed where the sidewalks were or were not. Maybe Julie can answer. Her hand is up.
Julie?
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak to that because I know MAPC has like inventory on sidewalks. I don't know to what degree it speaks to the quality or any of the like connectivity issues, the level of detail this study would do. But I'll look into that. I'm only been about 6 months, but I wanted to flag that there could be some overlap with this study and the Safe Streets for All, the big federal grant that MAPC and CTPS are undertaking. And I don't know exactly the detail which, but I know there's a pretty extensive sidewalk inventory piece and streets in general that could be already reflected in that body of work that Walk Boston that they probably just doesn't know about.
Thanks, Julie. And I see your question in the chat as well on how many projects. I think it kind of comes down to the budgets for all of these, right? And so it's really like you said, there's about $150,000 for these discrete studies. So I don't know if the budgets have been estimated yet. I don't think they're in the PDF at this time, but is that kind of a next step with all of this, is to kind of hone in on what the priorities are, and then from there quantify what the dollar amounts would be?
Yeah, I think so. So 150 was how much we have this year, and that we're estimating that that's what we're going to have for FFY 2025 too. That's not an exact number. But yeah, I think the idea is to get an understanding of priorities, which studies might be the most interesting, and then go back and see, once we have that kind of final number, go back and see what we can do, which are the most interesting, which are the highest priority, and which can we fit into that budget one way or another, whether it's like a phased approach, whether we're reducing the scope a little bit, or adjusting it to whatever our needs are. But yeah, that'll be the next step.
Okay, thanks, Shalika. Len?
And just for the record, I'm a big sidewalk person because I either walk or take transit everywhere. So I'm trying to think about like how can we use this data to help people, make policy, but also and off that policy then generate an incentive to do some funding. Because with municipalities like Arlington would love to do more sidewalks, but we can barely keep up with our streets, like keeping our streets paved sufficiently. So if someone said, we'll give you some money do your sidewalks, we can say, well, thank you very much, and we're going to do that. I think what we need to make the case to the money givers is like, why is this a good way to spend the money? And I think working off what Julia said, we can say that this makes things safer for pedestrians. I think that's a big selling point. And also, I think if we can say that this will encourage people to walk more, because we know that active transportation and walking is healthier, I think that's a good selling point too. So then I think if we could say we have these gaps in the sidewalk network, and if there's an equity argument to be made or a population argument that if we build more sidewalks, we'll have more people walking more safely, then I think we can maybe justify having more money spent in this area. So I'm selling myself on these studies more. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. David?
Yeah. Sorry. so in addition to sidewalks, I mean, I do remember seeing sidewalk maps years ago, but I don't think I've ever seen like an inventory of pedestrian beacons, like rapid flash beacons and hawk signals. I know like here in Newton, we're putting a ton of them in all over the place, and it's probably the case in other communities. So, I mean, that might be something new. And, what's the impact of all this investment in helping to create safer crossings for pedestrians in terms of, just overall safety and even the number of pedestrians walking around. Maybe that could be part of one of these. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thanks, David. Okay. Tom.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, no, it's kind of the last two items, I'm kind of going through what, Somerville does, and we get about 1.2 million in chapter 90 money per year. But since the sidewalk pavement needs are so far beyond that, they supplement that with bond funding, financing, which gives us about 5 million a year. So, one of the big issues is there's not enough money, to maintain the existing infrastructure that we have now. And it's funny, and we're in the process of doing a large water infrastructure project throughout the city. And so the complaint level is super high about the roads, but it was high before all this. And so, I think, and again, another study could be done, but it's really going to go back to, where is this money going to come from, right? And that's the real key piece to all this. And then the other thing I would think is I am sure now, I'd have to double check, but I'm sure Somerville has a really good inventory of their sidewalks and their conditions. I would think most cities and towns would have that. I do remember years ago, some of the suburban members were, where they don't actually have sidewalks on a lot of their streets. They were, putting in some requests through the tip for, sidewalk work. But, so I guess I'm trying to figure out what will we add to this study? Do we think that we're not going to get enough information from the municipalities as to where they have sidewalks, where they don't, and what their conditions are? And then the other piece I wanted to piggyback on what David just said is, Somerville's investing in a lot in, raised sidewalks, the on-demand flashes so that, you get to a not raised sidewalks, raised crosswalks, but also on-demand, light changes. So you push the button, it starts flashing, and cars are supposed to stop and, cross the street. So we've been investing in a lot of that also for, more pedestrian safety. So again, if you were going to do a study on that, would you be looking at crosswalks and what type of other infrastructure cities and towns are using?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think if this does move forward, it would have to involve coordination with municipalities and collecting data they already have, right, as opposed to going out and collecting new. So yeah, I think that would be an important consideration. That's something to consider for next steps. Scoping this. Jen?
Just wanted to share that Boston, I'd say historically hasn't had the greatest records on its sidewalks, but recently had a company called Cyclomedia do a scan and digitize them. How everything's in this system called Cartograph. So anyway, we might have information to share on Boston sidewalks if that helps impact the scope of what would be needed for the rest of the region. Great.
Thanks, Jen. All right. Well, yeah, I think some follow-up there will be good. So we'll do that offline. I can keep us moving here on to A3, which is on micromobility. Casey, are you going to speak to this one as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can. So I think I'm curious to hear what everyone's opinions are of this one. So we haven't done as much work on electric micromobility. And so I think that there are a lot of really good questions posed here with this project suggestion. And it's I think it's a little unclear fully what the scope of the work would be at this point, but I think it would be interesting to hear what everyone's level of interest is. Just for reference, I do have to hop off at 2, and I know we have a few more of these types of projects to go over. So if anyone has any questions about some of the other active transportation projects.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to this, I know we just are funding a scope now on blue bikes and access to transit on micromobility and where there might be gaps in that or opportunities to kind of create first and last mile connections through the blue bike system. So I don't know if that's kind of covering some of this or if there's overlap, but feels like some of this might be happening already. Len?
So I have a request, and that is, can we somehow come up with terminology that separates out micro transit like we had, this morning with the Chelsea Revere, be like bus type service, and this micro, mobility, the like the electric bikes, and maybe I just answered it. I guess one is micro transit and the one's micro mobility, right? Is that the distinction? And so if I say micro mobility, I'm not going to be talking about like the Chelsea Revere, project that we talked about. And okay,
Right. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, the use of the word micro is yeah, yeah, it's multiple things.
Thanks.
But okay.
That's it.
Any other comments on that? Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Not yet. I like the questions. So yeah, I'm just not sure we structure the study. Which questions do we answer? But I think it's certainly worth considering. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Lynn. And thanks for the comment in the chat, Jen. That's helpful to know that that's of particular interest. All right. Moving on then to the one on level of traffic stress. Casey?
I think that this one is really interesting. I appreciate that Emily proposed this one, and I think as you can see in the notes that the final project could be useful for our smaller municipalities. One thing that I think we'll need to grapple with a little bit with this is just that we did develop our bicycle and pedestrian report cards a few years back, and just kind of figuring out where those fit in with this type of analysis that goes back to the level of traffic stress that that did exist prior to our development of a tool that was targeted more to our region. But I think that using the existing level of traffic stress that's more widely adopted and applied, even in Cambridge and things like in our region, I think that would be really, really helpful and a good way to kind of assess the level of traffic stress throughout the region.
Great, thanks, Casey. Any reactions to this one?
I very much like this one.
Yeah.
I very much like this one, so I think, I would like to pursue this more and understand it a lot more, so just the whole notion of trying to figure out how to make going from point A to point B less stressful is appealing, but it could be, once we get the details of how we do the study, either increases appeal or decreases, but I'd like to pursue this one. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Len. Jen?
Yeah, just a quick note that Boston has developed a BLTS score and applied it to our streets. I would say that it was, I don't know if it's the most sophisticated system, and would certainly be interested in seeing kind of what other approaches to it might be. But even I think what we have has been very useful to us in terms of understanding what conditions are in different areas and having a methodical way of deciding where to make improvements.
Great, thanks, Jen. Yeah, it'd be super useful if this does move forward to look at that and kind of apply it region-wide potentially. Julia?
Yeah, I'd echo what the staff comment said about this making bike infrastructure more approachable for smaller municipalities. I don't feel like they have the capacity financially or staff or even like the political capital and support to do quote unquote bike lanes or protected bike lanes or things that can be triggering and difficult or expensive, and just simply framing it from a comfort and stress and safety and things you can do with the existing street network in a way that you might not have otherwise thought you could do with what you already have. So I think that could unlock a lot of possibilities for smaller meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Don't see any others, so we'll move on to the next one on making the data walk. Improving the use of the bike ped count data application. Casey?
Yeah, so this one would build off of our bicycle and pedestrian count data application update project that we just presented at the beginning of February. And this would essentially be like figuring out more of the technical elements that we weren't able to accomplish with the first phase of the project. So this is something that I would really like to push for, but I also realize we have so many really great projects. So yeah, any questions that you all have about this, I'm happy to field.
Thanks, Casey. Questions?
So if Casey wants it, I want it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think generally if it is, useful to staff and municipalities that are using it or users of the tool, right? It's, I think a good use of funds to make sure it's, improving that application. So.
I like the title, Making the Data Walk.
Yeah.
And the term middleware.
Yeah, I can't take credit for it, but
I haven't heard middleware. Is that new? Like update to middleware? Like
yeah, so the middleware is actually like the thing that communicates between what our online platform is, like so the website part that we can all interact with very easily, and then the database that we host that has all of the information. And so basically making it possible for our publicly facing portion to on the fly kind of pull the data and process it in different ways. So the idea would be to like provide instantaneous visualization, which would be pretty fun for people to be able to look at the data and not have to download it and be able to see how patterns have changed at a different location over time, or even just like seasonally, given what data we have.
Great. Thanks, Casey. All right. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of the time here because we're at 1:58. Srilekha, did you have in mind that we would kind of schedule a follow-up to go through the rest of these at a future date?
Yes.
Or is this scheduled till 2 o'clock, right? I just want to.
Yes, it's scheduled till 2. I guess I will talk to you offline, Derek, about scheduling the next meeting. Just keeping in mind TIP committee meetings as well that
Right.
but yes, in the next week or two, I'll be in touch about scheduling future meetings.
Great. And the overall timeline for PWP development is it's kind of like a release of the draft plan in like around May.
Yeah.
Early June, right? Yep.
Early
Okay.
mid-May, I think.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of time, but yeah, sooner is better. So we'll be in touch on some dates for our future. I think we'll be able to get through the rest of the list in what they're like almost halfway through the PDF now. So I think, I know there may be other ideas too that aren't on this list that I want to make sure we have time to talk about if there are any. So we can do those. And I know a lot have been referred that we didn't get to other programs, so we may not spend as much time on those ones. So, okay, well, we'll let folks know. I think, this is good though for today. And yeah, Tom.
Just real quick, I was able to update, confirm about what Somerville does for inventorying of its streets and sidewalks. So what they do have an inventory, and they do a rolling update each year. So about 1/3 of our streets and sidewalks get re-inventoried every year. So they just keep that on a rolling basis so that they're pretty up to date. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Very quickly, sorry, I mean, again, for the background noise, if we have a meeting on a date that doesn't have an MPO meeting, I'd be game for a longer meeting if that would help us get through the list. That's it. Thank you.
I'll second that, Len.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We could probably use like a 90-minute or,
Yeah.
potentially. Yeah.
I think in the past I circulated like a quick survey to members, like it's called When to Meet. We just pick a time that works for all of us. So I can
Okay.
send that out today or tomorrow, and we can go from there. Because if folks' schedules are flexible enough to
With like the one agenda item of completing this review.
exactly, yeah. And if we
sounds
can
good.
have it on the Thursday, then we can make that work.
Perfect.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. All right, we'll plan on that then. And yeah, we'll look to make it a bit longer so we have sufficient time for all of it. Okay. Is there anything else on the normal agenda slides, or is the next item just to adjourn? I know we usually have like a member items. Not sure if anyone else had anything else. I think we kind of covered next steps here. So yeah, with that, I'll just ask for a motion and second to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right, thanks everyone. I think without objection, we can be adjourned. So we'll be in touch on scheduling the next meeting, and we will go from there. So have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, everyone.
bye.